Hi everyone! There's a new documentary out called The Lost Boys: Searching for Manhood, which is the first documentary that looks at detransitioning purely from a male perspective. I think it's so important to have a documentary like this so that we can better understand the pressures that young men feel growing up, their particular vulnerabilities, and what it is that sucks them into the idea of transitioning. And I often think, if I was younger today, I would have so gone down that route of trying to become a woman somehow. And stories of male detransitioners always hit me differently from the female detransition stories. As soon as I found out about it, I got in touch with Jennifer Lahl, who is one of the producers and directors, alongside 𝗀𝗃𝗽𝗀𝗃, and Gary Powell, who is one of the writers. I wanted to find out more about why they chose to make the film, the process of making it, and also what they learned along the way. So we organized a Zoom call, and here's the conversation that we had. I hope you find it informative, and please do go watch The Lost Boys: Searching for Manhood. Hello, Jennifer. Hello, Gary. How are you two?
Hello, fine,
Doing great.
thank you.
Jennifer, what time is it where you are?
It's a little after 9 in the morning.
Oh,
I'm in
so wow.
California.
So for you, it's early morning. For Gary and I, it is late afternoon. And I'm so pleased to be talking to both of you and to talk about the documentary that you've produced, The Lost Boys: In Search of Manhood. And what initially piqued my interest about it is that it just focuses on the boys, or the young men, if you like. So I wanted to ask, because I know that Jennifer, you also did the Detransition Diaries, Saving Our Sisters. Was this then a natural progression to move on to the boys?
You know, it really wasn't my intent to make a film focus on boys. What happened, though, was I had parents reach out to me and said, please talk about our sons. Please talk about the boys. And I thought, well, of course. They're obviously a big part of this gender ideology movement that we're all fighting. So yeah, it was really a plea from parents that reached out to me and said, what about the boys? And then I started realizing slowly how much the boys really aren't a lot of the focus of this. It's more young girls and what's happening with the social contagion and the internet and Reddit and all those places. So yeah, so that's how we sort of quickly, and it's only been about a year since the Detransition Diaries came out. So we quickly moved right into production. We didn't sit around and think about it very long. We just said, yeah, this is an important part of the story.
And Gary, how did you get involved?
I've been working with Jennifer for some time. We're good friends and colleagues, and I'm a consultant to the Centre for Bioethics and Culture. And we've worked on a couple of films previously, haven't we, Jennifer? But I haven't had the same kind of role this time round. I was a co-writer and also the UK production manager. So this was a very interesting learning curve for me and very enjoyable one as well.
Yeah, and Gary's a really trusted friend and a colleague. And when we realized who we were going to interview in this film, and that quite a few of the interviews were going to be conducted in the United Kingdom, that's when I quickly said to Gary, can you help with the production side? Because I'm in California and just the logistics of, as all the filmmaking that you're involved in, Menno, that you have to have all this crew and talent. And, it was just logistically very wonderful. Gary was able to, find places for us to set up our gear and help me get from point A to point B, which train to take. And then I thought it was natural for him because, 𝗀𝗃𝗽𝗀𝗃, our other partner in this project, we're two women. We thought it was really kind of cool that women made this film, and women allowed men to speak and just have their moment. But also in the script writing part of the film, I thought it was really important, though, to have Gary's input and assistance in writing and telling the story, because I can only sort of try to imagine what is going on in the head of the men, the young boys. I don't presume to have all that insight knowledge of men.
Yes, and it's called The Lost Boys: Searching for Manhood. And that title in itself already says so much, that here you have, you present 5 different men, young men, who got to the point of wanting to escape manhood and experiencing a crisis of who am I, what am I? The sad irony of it is they are the only ones who can walk this path. You can only walk this path as a man. How did you find these 5? And were there maybe others that dropped out?
Well, you know, because I made the first film in this space was called Transmission, What's the Rush to Reassign Gender? The second was the Detransition Diary, Saving Our Sisters, and then now this. You know, Gary and I, you know, are very active on social media platforms. We already knew many of the, you know, sort of outspoken detransition men. So it wasn't like we had to sort of go, well, who's out there? And, you know, I watch Benjamin Boyce's podcast a lot, and he's obviously interviewed quite a few, you know, men that have struggled with gender dysphoria and these kind of thoughts. So we already knew them. So then we just reached out to quite a few to sort of see who was interested and willing. You know, obviously some of them said no because, you know, they're just trying to get on with their life, you know, and they've taken enough hate and heat from when you put yourself out there, you just sort of get viciously attacked. So the 5 that we ended up with were, you know, agreed to, you know, to be in the film. And we wanted, you know, sort of a diverse group of stories, not just the same old, you know, so some of the stories, when people watch the film, you know, some of the men were just sort of felt constrained by traditional, you know, gender roles. You know, they did, I think they would have been just fine being a boy if they knew that it was okay to be a boy that was interested in the arts and music. But in their mind, they're like, well, there's something wrong. You know, we sort of tease out the role of shame and what young boys feel when they go through puberty. They go from being just sort of, you know, and I'm talking to 2 men, so correct me, you know, from just being goofy kids to all of a sudden this raging, you know, hormones and sex drive, and they don't know what to, and they feel shame and then the role of pornography and internet use, and 2 of the men in the film had surgeries, and the other 3 men just did hormones and dressed and changed names and pronouns. So we wanted sort of a mix of all these sort of complex things that cause young boys, young men to feel confused.
What struck me was how different they were, but then why not? You know, they're just 5 guys. Why would they be similar? And in terms of what you say about the raging hormones, I have no idea what that's like in terms of, that's not how my puberty developed. Mine developed more like what Alexander was talking about, and Rich here as well, that it developed slow and later than, you know, my peers at the time. I remember I used to be part of like an athletics, local athletics club, and I was really bad at everything. So they just put me in the long distance running group. So all you do is just run around the track. And one winter, it was so cold that normally we train outdoors. So we went indoors somewhere. And then afterwards, we had a shower, and it was a communal shower. And I would have only been 14, and the others would have been 14, 15. But they had like penises and balls and hair. And I was just like, I don't have any of that. You know, I still have a child's body. And it's when you hear these stories from, for example, Alexander and Richie saying similar things, that, well, for others, it's the sudden roar, the rush of the hormones and the sex drive that's disturbing for them. I guess for guys like me and the other 2 that I mentioned, it's more the alienation and feeling like you're not fitting in, and am I a proper man if it's not really kicking in? I mean, even now, I can't grow full facial hair, you know, I don't grow anything there or there. And Gary, obviously, you grow more than I do.
It's stick on, actually. I've got glue.
One by one.
It takes ages. It took me ages to get ready.
So all these different things can feed into this idea of there's something wrong with me. And I really liked how you presented so many different stories, but also it made me quite fearful for how easy it is to get sucked in. How would you say it was different from when you did the Detransition Diaries with the young women? And are there particular vulnerabilities specific to young men that make the idea of transitioning seductive to them?
Yeah, this is maybe where I'll defer to Gary to sort of weigh in on particular differences for men being a man. I mean, I have to say that once we did all of the interviews and we moved into the script writing mode, that was the first time in my history of being a filmmaker where I was really unsure of myself at handling these stories, which is why it was really good to have Gary join us as a co-writer. Because there was a part of me that goes, okay, I'm a woman. I know what's in my head. I know the vulnerabilities of young girls that transitioned and detransitioned. I just felt that. I knew all that. I raised daughters. I've also raised a son, but again, I'm not in his head. So I felt very unsure of myself as we began to sort of tell the story, because Gary and Callie and myself all want to do justice to their stories. I always see the people in our films as some people that, and I want to say victims, but they've been harmed. They've been harmed by people that they've trusted. They've been harmed by professionals that should have had their best interest at the very front and didn't have that. So it was with kind of fear and trepidation that we told these stories. And the long conversations we had with what ended up on the editing room floor, because the runtime is 48 minutes, and we just know, Menno, you have videos. People don't watch long form movies anymore. And so, we probably had 20 hours of film that we had to distill down to a 48-minute film telling all these different stories. And then the supporting roles, because we had experts, Joe Burgo, Oz Hakim, we have Graham Linehan, we have a father who has a gender confused son. So you add to it, Gary.
Well, I was just thinking there was so much absolutely outstanding material, really valuable, interesting, original material, hours and hours that we had to distill down to that shortcut that Jennifer referred to. And that was I think we probably all did. I found that a very painful process to have to suggest removing certain lines that were very good and that I really wanted people to hear. But we had so much good material. We had to be quite ruthless with discipline, and we had to cut things. And really, there could have been a whole sequence of films on this subject. But we got it down to the 48 minutes or so. And that the fact that there was so much really valuable material reflects on the really important stories that everybody had to tell, and people spoke in their own words. People were allowed to say what they felt they wanted to say. And people, each individual who spoke had a unique experience, and the clinicians had a unique expertise, both of them experts in gender dysphoria. And we were hearing things that we hadn't heard before. And I was listening to a lot of these contributions and thinking, that's absolutely right, or I hadn't thought about that and I didn't realize that had happened. So it was a fabulous learning experience, but so much very, very important material. And I found all the contributors as well, all very, very, very courageous people, very intelligent, engaged. And what struck me as well, and I think you might agree with me, Jennifer, was the optimism that comes out from the film after people have been so terribly damaged and harmed, cruelly, stupidly damaged. There's a way, human beings often have a way of getting back on track again. And there were some wonderful accounts of people's optimism and thoughts about how things will change.
And that was feedback from the Detransition Diaries film as well, is that we ended on sort of, a very hopeful note. And Graham gets the final words in this film on The Lost Boys, which is, very hopeful as well. And as to your point about the difference between girls and boys, Menno, It's not, I think it was Ritchie, and again, it was something that was said on camera that didn't make it into the film. So I'm remembering it was Ritchie, but it might have been somebody else that said this, but how boys get into this fast and they get out of it fast. And I thought that was something I never heard, that boys quickly say, oh, I must be born in the wrong body, I'm going to become a female. But then when they wake up, to the horrors of what has happened, they get right out of it. And that might be, I don't know, but with the girls, girls are much more social and they run in groups. And so they're much more influenced by peers. And I didn't sense that with boys. I could be wrong. And Menno, you might know more about that with boys that get caught up in this. Do they run in packs and they're really more influenced by their peers and their friends at school? Or is it just a heavy use of internet and they get into these rabbit holes, in these groups of, groomers or AGP people or...
I never thought about that. So that's a really interesting one, because while I do realize that socially girls, as you say, are much more sort of in packs, and we've seen that with other social contagions and things like, anorexia and bulimia and self-harming, that's something that girls are much more vulnerable to. I guess I've always been a bit of an Einzelgänger myself, in terms of flitting around from group to group and sort of being part of everything, and therefore not actually part of a group. And sometimes that's, especially as a teen, I felt very lonely because of that. I think that's also what could have easily driven me down to this route that these five guys went down. And I can never talk about this without getting emotional. So to hear these boys having gone through it, like when two of them have had surgery, their penises and balls are gone, and still, as you say, there's optimism. Like Ritchie is setting up this what he calls a group for men recovering from medical transition. I thought it was interesting that he didn't use the word detransition, or that he sort of stopped using it. And it made me wonder about the use of words, because it's so important that we have a word to talk about those who've gone through that medical process and then said, it's not for me, or I made a mistake. And Ritchie in an interview once said, I think at the LGBT Alliance conference, detransition doesn't necessarily mean you stop taking hormones. It's the mindset that you step away from this whole mindset of, I can become the other sex. Sorry, I kind of lost track of what I was trying to say.
Yeah, we were talking also about social contagion and,
right,
and peer influence. I was wondering, Menno, what do you think about this? Because as Jennifer was talking about the girls and the risk of social contagion of these kinds of patterns among girls, and then asked you about males. I'm wondering whether gay males might be possibly more influenced by social contagion and by peer pressure, or it could be my imagination. But there seems, at least at the moment, in the kind of gay subculture or LGBT plus subculture that's come to exist, a bit of a Borg mind where everybody is supposed to think the same way. I don't know whether people are probably dressing the same way, with the same kinds of appearance and listening to the same kind of music. And I'm just wondering whether gay males are kind of socially fragile to the extent of not being embedded in society to the same extent as heterosexual males, and therefore quite desperately look for an alternative subculture and feel anxious in case they're rejected by that subculture, and whether that might make gay males more likely, more vulnerable to that kind of influence.
I can see that. I mean, that's pure speculation on my part. But if you are a gay guy, and I guess the difference is from if you're straight and when you're gay, is that when you're gay, then you get much more of this, oh, this is your community, this is what you're part of. You get it in schools, you get it in I used to be part of a gay men's singing group, and it used to be called part of a company called the Gay Men's Dance Company. Now it's called Rainbow Nation. So whereas I joined that because I at that point, I really needed to be with other gay men, especially as someone who's never been part of a group or a tribe or a clique. I was going through a bit of a rough time, and I just needed to be with gay men. And that was there at the time. Now that's gone, because they've all they're gone with the woo-woo, as I say. They've gone completely extreme. And there's one girl there who says that she's a non-binary femme trans gay man. And it's like, she just talks about being a gay man. And it's like, I just wanted to be with actual gay men. But one thing that came out of the documentary is how, something that you touched on earlier, the idea of shame, and that these guys, like Richie said, like he was even ashamed to be a man because men have ruined the world, kind of thing.
Yeah.
When you're a gay man, it's like there's a double whammy of failing as a man, because not only have you failed as a man, but you can also fail as a gay man. Like, where especially the effeminate ones, if you look at lesbians, for example, they tend to reject all these gender roles and say, fuck off, bye. Whereas gay men seem to somehow glorify this gender role of masculinity, and you see it in the clubs, you see it on the gay scene, where you get these uber manly guys sort of overcompensating for being gay, perhaps. And then you've got these effeminate ones that just, I've had this when I was young, you look at dating profiles and it says no femmes or no girly guys or this and that. So I wonder if there is this double whammy. And there's, what's his name? Juno Dawson, an author who basically a gay man who hated being gay and then turned himself into this pornified ideal of a woman. Has written books that are now in libraries and schools and all that kind of stuff. And he said in an interview with a formerly gay magazine that being gay was just a consolation prize for those who don't have the guts to transition.
What a dangerous thing to say. Yes, I've read that before.
Dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I get that line, when some people aren't happy with what I'm saying, that they say, oh, you're just an angry, bitter trans woman who didn't get a referral to the gender clinic. Or, they make fun of my facial hair, that I only grow this little. And they're like, oh, you really need to go on, testosterone and grow a proper beard. And then I'm like, all this goes back to reinforcing these gendered stereotypes.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a proper beard. That's not a proper beard. You don't fit with the stereotype of men, therefore you can't possibly be. And it seems like there is such a one-dimensional take on what a man is or can be, but also I think there's a very one-dimensional take of why men and young guys go down the transition path. There's a lot of talk. You mentioned porn, and there's the AGP, and obviously that's a big part of it. But what your documentary touches on, because as you say, you can only show so much in 48 minutes. There's so much more to it.
Yes. And when you look at the actual, research or social science studies and stuff, there are so many comorbidities. And you'll see in the film, how many of these young men were, autistic, Asperger's, how many of these men had mental health issues, that were trauma-based, how many of these men they felt like they couldn't be a man because they didn't do, all these prescribed, you have to be this, this, and this. I think it was Dr. Hakim who says, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. Well, therefore I must be a woman, because I'm not that. And the messages the boys hear, which, you alluded to with, Richie saying, well, I grew up thinking, men caused all the problems in the world because of who we are. And the topic of toxic masculinity. And so it's really complex, but you would also think that in the 21st century, that we would have just figured out, you're biologically male, you're biologically female, just live your life as you want to live your life.
Yeah.
You don't have to change yourself, just be you.
That's how you break them all. I always say the only way to break these stereotypes, these sexist stereotypes, is to embrace your sex and give a gender the middle finger.
Yes.
That's how you do it, not by embracing the stereotype and then somehow claiming or thinking that that's your true
I was in a
True.
meeting last
Yeah.
week, and one of the people in the meeting said, I thought this was brilliant. You can have gender and we'll have sex.
That
I
needs
love
to
That
go
was
onto a
brilliant.
bumper sticker, doesn't it? That is brilliant. But that's a really important thing as well. That a really important point you make, Menno, about there being more than just one reason why men are presenting as women. And I think that sometimes there can be some confusion in the gender critical movement. And I'm very keen for there to be open discussions in the gender critical movement, because we're a very, very diverse group of people with lots of different opinions. And we don't really want to be in the situation where there's only one acceptable opinion on each topic. And I think this question of I've noticed this fairly early. A lot of people were always talking as if AGP were the only explanation why men were presenting as cultural women in public. And of course, there are lots of reasons why people decide wrongly that they are transgender, and we've mentioned some of them. There's autism, and that's and you'll see from the film. I don't want to cause any spoilers here, but in the film that's dealt with quite thoroughly. Young people, black and white thinking, autism, alienated, isolated. Lots of time online, being told by online groomers, political groomers, that they'll be happy if they identify as transgender, and they think that this is some kind of solution to their feelings of loneliness and detachment from others. And the black and white thinking encourages that as well. If I do this, I'm going to be happy. Other people tell me they're happy once they identified as transgender. Then we've got the gay young men who, and in my opinion, gay young men are particularly vulnerable, because it is such it's the illusion of a shortcut from so that people don't have to come to terms with being gay. And there's still a lot of anti-gay prejudice in society, and even when people grow up in families that are quite open-minded and modern, there are lots of people who come from families and cultures and traditions where that's not the case, and where they would actually be in danger if they came out to their parents as gay. And there are lots of people who are, suffering with struggling to come to terms with their same-sex orientation, and
You
feeling
said
very.
same-sex. Oh my God.
I said same. Is there a box? I think there's got to be something like a swear box for me to put money into. Same
Obviously felt that
sex,
you
not
can't
gender.
so some stupid gay man on Twitter who's completely, betting for the other side, but not in the way that we know. We understand that, Gary. But as in beating the woo-woo drum, who is telling me that if I use the term same-sex attracted, I'm using a term that is some kind of gay conversion therapy.
Well, it means you're a fascist. It means you're a fascist if you do that, Menno. So very, very concerning. Yeah. So
Well,
we've got these young gay men many struggling to come to terms with being gay, and of course with puberty. I know you mentioned your own puberty wasn't so overwhelming, but for a lot of young people, it is really quite overwhelming. And then you've got these same-sex feeling. I've said it again, and they're overwhelming, very, very strong, powerful feelings. And of course, that amplifies the guilt and shame as well. And for these young gay men to think, well, I'm not really a man because I'm attracted to other men. I'm probably a woman in a man's body. So that's what I'm going to say I am. And then you become heterosexual because you are allegedly a woman sexually attracted to some men. So you can claim that you're you don't have to come to terms with being. So it's it's a trap, really, that a lot of young gay men can fall into, and especially as gay men and gay women, young gay male and females, tend to be gender non-conforming. It's more likely we're going to be gender non-conforming than our heterosexual counterparts. So you've got that as well.
Established, that was common knowledge for so long, until the puberty blockers came along, and that suddenly went out the window.
Yeah.
And I've started using the word transing away the gay. I mean, I'm not the person who came up with it, but I saw it and I thought that this is a very good phrase. It's now being used in Parliament in the UK, so that's brilliant. It's being put on the map. It's being used in BBC articles now. Anyone who tells me there's no such thing as transing away the gay, to me, just shows their ignorance of how deep gay shame can run. How shit it can make you feel, and what you would do to try and get rid of it. And especially when you're young, or 12, 13, 14, and you're just sort of realizing, oh. I remember when I had my first ever sexual thought about a guy. I would have been 15 or 16, and I just had this. No, I didn't have this thought. No, this didn't happen. And for me, religion also came into it. Was that something that some of the other guys talked about as well?
I do believe that was one of the young men's stories, that he had grown up in a culture and maybe even a family that was more socially, religiously conservative.
So what we're looking at is here, you have these 5 different guys, very different stories, but the one thing they have in common is how they were failed by the healthcare system and mental health support. And here we see very clear parallels with how the girls were being treated. What do you think is your key message to the healthcare, to the so-called experts?
Well, I don't know if you know this about me, Menno, but I worked as a nurse for 2 decades. And I worked in pediatric medicine for a very, very long time. So my message is I'm putting the medical establishment on notice. In California, we have 3 lawsuits against one of the biggest healthcare providers in state in California, filed by detransitioners. So I want to sue them. I want to remove their medical licenses. I want to revert. When I was working in clinical hospital nursing, I saw children that were born with ambiguous genitalia and extra X and extra Y chromosome. I saw intersex children, and back in the olden days when I was in nursing, the doctors were the ones that were saying, "Let's wait. We don't have to rush." And it was more, the rush was at that time coming from parents. Because you have a baby, you want to tell everybody what you had. We have to send out a birth announcement. We have to say we had a boy. We have to give him a name. And the doctors were like, let's wait. Let's wait and see how this child is going to mechanically, are they going to need surgery because they can't pee? Are they going to need, replacement of hormones? If they're genetically looking like a male, will they need testosterone because their testosterone's let's wait and figure out what this child needs to live a healthy, functional life as whatever their sex is. So for me, I look at what happened in the Detransition Diaries to women and this film to these young boys, and it's just obvious that they're crying for help. Brian in the film, he says, any good therapist would have looked at his drug and alcohol use and said, let's get you sober first.
Yes.
These boys talk about the impact of estrogen on their minds and how it clouds their decision-making thinking. And Alexandra, I think, says in the film, I wasn't thinking clearly when I opted to have full-blown bottom surgery because my judgment was clouded by, taking the wrong hormones.
Wasn't he the one who said that just as he was about to go under, he thought, this is wrong?
Yeah, and it was he went viral when he released his story on his own YouTube channel. And when I saw that story that he released of his own personal story, I immediately knew we need to get him in this film, because he had this moment of being wheeled into the operating room, and it was, I think he said, I don't know if I said it out loud, but my mind was saying, please, somebody help me. Please, somebody stop me. This cry for help. And the next thing he says, I woke up and they're showing me my testicles in a bag.
in a bag.
Mhm.
That was a really shocking moment in that
I
documentary.
mean, that's just brutal.
And that doesn't that prove that actually proves that nobody can really give consent for that kind of operation. And if it was an operation for cancer, it would be a different matter, of course. But if they're consenting to an operation like that because they have some understanding that they're transgender and they want to have their genitals removed, right up until the point when they lose consciousness under general anesthetic, they need to be able to say, I want this to stop. And of course, he'd reached that point. He hadn't quite lost consciousness, but he wasn't able to speak.
Yeah.
So I think that was a terrible violation of his human rights. That was absolutely appalling. And how horrific. Can you just imagine what that must have been like to be, they're falling out of consciousness and thinking, I don't want this to be done, but I can't tell anybody.
Can't do anything. Like, I mean,
they shouldn't be doing it to anybody, in my opinion.
And
They
even
shouldn't be doing it to anybody, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I used to have a more liberal attitude towards that. I used to think in exceptional circumstances, maybe, over the age of 20, et cetera, et cetera. But I've come to the view that, we don't give young people with anorexia liposuction, do we? If they say they're fat and they've got anorexia, we wouldn't say, well, you are fat. Of course, we will affirm that because you say you're fat and we're going to affirm your identity. And would you like to have liposuction? I mean, the whole thing is crazy. And this is, as far as I'm concerned, amputating people's genitals for what are really cosmetic reasons falls along the same, and political reasons falls along the same lines.
Yeah, I know people disagree on that issue, and I am with you 100%, Gary. I don't think even adults, some people say, well, we have to wait till the brain is, that's 24 or 26 years old because the brain is fully developed and you can make those. I don't think that's the role of proper medicine, is to amputate otherwise healthy, normal, functioning body parts. And, I think even adults who have, I think gender dysphoria is real. I don't want to discount people just really struggle with these, but I think often it's an issue in the mind. And how do you, with good counseling and psychotherapy and psychiatry, help somebody come to terms with, their physical body and accept their physical body. But even in the film, the gentleman who didn't have surgery still have, one of the young men talks about the fact that because of the long use of estrogen, that he probably is sterile. And in the realization that if he wanted to have his own children, biologically children, that's lost to him, which is a real tragedy.
And of course, you have these actors who want to impose these kinds of surgeries on children, below the age of 18. I mean, it's bad enough when it's above 18.
I mean,
and how can they make decisions about their own sterility at that age? It's insane.
I find it insane that we even have to say that it's insane.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
A point that Richie's made before is because obviously there's a lot of focus now on minors, and especially in the States where they're having double mastectomies as young as 12 in California, which is at Kaiser Permanente, which is probably the one, Jennifer, you mentioned, where there's lawsuits. Layla Jane is one of them. She had her breast removed 1 month into being 13 years old. And there's a picture of her lying in the hospital bed. Maybe she's just come out of, or she's just coming around from the anesthetic. But Richie made a good point that adults too are at risk of this. And it just emphasizes the importance of good mental health support and to look at the bigger picture. And it takes time to get to know your therapist, to build trust with your therapist, and for your therapist to be able to really drill down into what it is that you're struggling with. And all that sort of goes out the window. I think there was one of the guys in the documentary said he had a prescription after a Zoom call.
And yeah, and if in the States, I don't know, I think it would probably used to be the same in the United Kingdom. In the States, almost all of the therapists are gender affirmation therapists. So you don't even have a shot at a therapist saying, let's look at your whole entire life and what's going on with all these areas in your life versus, oh, well, you have these feelings. Brian, he had an attraction to a certain kind of really strange genre of pornography. Well, you like that kind of porn, you're trans.
Okay.
That's what he was told. Yes.
So, I talk with parents a lot, and especially parents that are trying to get their child that's still within their home proper care. And how do they vet therapists? And a lot of them say things like they'll just contact a therapist to do like a screening, and they'll say, what kind of books would you recommend I read? And based on the books that the therapist recommends, they know, oh, this is a gender affirmation only therapist.
Okay.
So, because they're desperately not wanting to send their child for therapy to somebody who's going to, one, remove the child, threaten to remove the child from the home because the parents aren't affirming, and in the United States, parents live with that fear every day. The schools are hiding from the parents what's going on, and the schools are calling the child one particular name or new pronouns. So parents live in like fear and terror of having their children removed and or just sending them to a therapist that's going to affirm the child's gender.
It's horrific enough when this is being done by the educational establishment, when the educational establishment is ideologically captured. But when our medical establishment is ideologically captured as well, that's the time we really need to start worrying. Because you mentioned, Jennifer, the example of the intersex babies where the surgeons would suggest just leaving the children for a while, and then you can determine whether they're more likely to live better as male or female. But of course, that is something that's observable, and intersex is different from so-called transgender or transgender identification, of course. And now we've got some doctors saying, well, baby's been born, but I really don't know whether that baby is male or female, and you'll just have to let the baby grow up and make up their own mind rather than me assign them a sex at birth. Well, how absurd is that? And all that means is that these surgeons are allowing commonly accepted and well-established words that define concepts to become detached from those concepts. So the words can then be applied to something else, but used as though they're being applied to the original concepts. So it's a sleight of hand. But what we're going to see now is the medical establishment giving us very poor healthcare, because if they cannot tell the difference between male and female, and if they're going to bend to very damaging political ideologies, then we are not going to have medical professionals with adequate sincerity and integrity and a commitment to truth. What we need is scientists. We need medical professionals who are scientists and have a commitment to truth and who refuse to lie.
Yeah.
And this is dissolving, and that's going to affect all our health. No matter what area of health, it's going to affect research, it's education, it's going to affect treatment of everything in the end.
Well, and those that have detransitioned, you hear often they seek medical care for the complications of their, surgeries, and doctors aren't trained because this is new territory. Ritchie speaks in the film about all the post-op complications he still has. And he says, I'm a lifelong patient. And the biggest scandal is in the US. I don't know how it is in the United Kingdom. We have insurance providers that will do double mastectomies and do 𝗍𝗶𝗲𝗀𝗍, and that's all covered. But if you regret it and you want to, you need surgical help or intervention after, you're on your own.
That was in your documentary, Detransition Stories, Saving Our Sisters. Grace was talking exactly about that. She's like, she was looking into breast reconstruction, but saying, I can't get it covered. Plus also then there's, again, the experience of having to undergo surgery when it's been so traumatic before.
Yeah.
and the risk of having silicone implants. And there was a post I saw where she posted a picture of her. She just had a baby. And I thought that was such a beautiful picture, because I think in the documentary, she talked about whether she didn't know whether she'd even be able to have a child. And here she was. But
she wasn't able to breastfeed her child.
She can't breastfeed a child, no.
And I mean, as a nurse, we know how beneficial that is to mother and child, you know, nutritionally, immune system, attachment, you know.
There was something that really was quite dark in the documentary, where earlier, you know, you touched on the role of porn, that for some of them that plays into it. And then Ritchie was talking about how you have these older men who sort of groom these younger men and want them to post explicit pictures of them and then compliment them and want to feminize them. That to me is a really dark, sinister aspect of it, especially when you consider that in the light of there are some online castration fetish groups who are in with 𝗍𝗪𝗲, who now say that eunuch gender is a thing. And in response to that, someone like Dr. 𝗍𝗪𝗀𝗽𝗃 then posted a video on TikTok saying, I do eunuch gender services now.
A group of gender diverse individuals who haven't been very visible are eunuchs, and there's an entire chapter devoted to these folks in the most recent version of the WPATH standards of care. WPATH is the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. And so basically a eunuch is somebody who's assigned male at birth but may not be comfortable with the masculine features and may also benefit from gender affirmation care, which could mean 𝗍𝗂𝗽𝗃𝗍 in some patients.
Yeah.
So dark.
And these young people are vulnerable. You know, the young people going into these chat rooms or groups, whatever they are,
looking for belonging, looking for some attention, and then as Ritchie,
affirmation.
You feel that there's someone who's a mentor.
Yeah, we had one father we interviewed in the film.
Yes,
because we wanted a parent perspective and a father's figure, because it was an all-male cast. And he talks about how once his son was in high school, his son got his own laptop that was given to him by the school. And he would wake up in the middle of the night and hear in his son's bedroom, he was talking, he was laughing. And he said, we had to turn our internet off at night because he was just up all night. All of a sudden he had instant access 24/7 to the internet with this, laptop. And, Graham says in the film, it's the internet. If you get your kids outside and away from the screens, that so much of this, this preying, this predatory stuff isn't going to be happening to our young boys, young girls, young children.
I'd kind of add, I think it was so important that we had a parent in the film as well, because I'm very conscious of how many family lives are being ruined by transgender ideology that's being peddled online and in people's schools, and often without the knowledge of the parents, deliberately concealed from the parents. And the lives of some of these parents, I wrote an article a little while ago, a couple of articles about a parent, and this isn't a parent who was interviewed for the film. This was in the UK. Somebody else. I wrote an article about a parent whose daughter had come out as a lesbian in her early teens, and had attended a class by a transgender presenter at school that the school hadn't told the parents was coming to visit. Then this was followed by a number of weeks of the girl isolating herself in her room with her laptop, and then emerging to say that she wasn't actually lesbian, she was transgender, and then demanding to go to the GP to have a referral to the gender clinic for hormones. And when the parents were questioning some of this, the the girl was threatening to commit suicide. And this is apparently quite a common strategy. And I wonder whether it's something that they're encouraged to do by some of these online grooming groups and individuals. That if people say, and of course, this is a theme in the, I don't want any to give any spoilers, but this theme is touched on in the film, although again, this isn't a parent that we interviewed. And of course, when parents are told by a child that they're thinking of committing suicide, it causes unbelievable anxiety and misery in the home. And the mother that I interviewed told me that she would go into her daughter's room during the night several times to make sure she was still breathing. And I think the people who are visiting this kind of misery on families and parents have so much to answer for. I mean, life for parents is hard enough already. A lot of parents are struggling. You know, there are interpersonal stresses. And then you have that, a completely unnecessary worry, and your child's been encouraged to threaten to commit suicide if you don't collude with their amputation or mutilation.
Yeah.
Look, I went to a talk about the future of trans healthcare about 2 years ago at my local library, and there was someone there. There was a trans medical organization there that worked with King's College Hospital in London, writing the trans guidance for the hospital. This is also an organization that's put out an online guide for women who believe to be gay men on how to have sex with gay men in gay cruising grounds while hiding the fact that they're female. And so they were there presenting, and some other people who, all of the non-binary or trans persuasion. And there was a volunteer there who is so-called a cis woman, right? The cis woman, at one point, they were talking about a loophole in the UK specifically, that if you can't get estrogen, for example, or testosterone, that you then get it somewhere else, privately or a dodgy website, or you make your own, because there's advice on how to do that online. You get onto the dodgy stuff, then you go to your GP and say, well, I'm on it now, so now you have a responsibility to get me the good stuff because I'm harming myself. And the GP can then say, no, I'm not going along with that. So then obviously they're all communicating to each other which GP you have to register with, who do go along with that stuff. And then the so-called cis woman ally turns around, because she was in the audience, and she turns to the audience and she goes, anyway, if you really can't get your GP to do it, just tell them you're suicidal. Because then something else kicks in, some other kind of mechanism where to protect, because it's a severe mental health situation, that they have to give you the stuff. And I turned to her and I said, as someone who has been on the brink of suicide during my teens, I said, are you seriously telling me that you would weaponize suicidality just to get the drugs? And then she went, and I'd been really quiet throughout, obviously, because I just wanted to absorb as much as I could and see what are they actually saying. And then she went, oh, no, that's not what I was saying. That's exactly what I was saying. Yeah. So on the one hand, the solution seems so obvious. We broaden the bandwidth of what it means to be a man, of what a man and a boy can be. And we get rid of all these restrictions, these rigid expectations and values. As a boy, you can be into art, you can be into dancing, you don't have to be boisterous. It's okay to want to be with the boisterous boys. It's okay to like so-called girly things or whatever. Just let them be, let them find a way. On the other hand, you have this onslaught on the internet, in the schools. You don't have a medical or a healthcare system or mental health support system that they've basically taken the options that you need off the table. It feels sometimes to me like there is so much that we're up against. But you said in the documentary there was still optimism. So how can we approach this in an optimistic way?
You know, I'm a believer in the stories. You know, we have to get the stories out of these people that, like you said, they don't see themselves as victims or survivors. You know, they see themselves as getting out of this movement, and we have to tell the stories of the harms. And let people come to their own conclusions that this is not the way. I mean, I think this is going to just come crashing to a halt because you can't keep harming people physically, emotionally. You cannot keep harming people and expect to get away with it. You know, through the history of medicine, we've had plenty of medical scandals, starting with lobotomies and what we did with in the Nuremberg trials and the exposure of experimentation on human beings. And, you know, in the United States, forced sterilization on people that we felt were unfit. You know, the jig is up. And I think between the whistleblowers, you know, exposing what's going on and the lawsuits, pretty soon the jig is up and people are going to go, well, that's not the way to help these people. The way to help these people is good old-fashioned therapeutic counseling, mental health therapy.
And Gary?
Do you know what? I'd like to leave it there with what Jennifer's just said. I think that would be a great way to end it. I don't know what else. I mean, apart from saying that, I think the optimism is to keep on, like the French existentialists. We keep on struggling. We keep on defying. We keep on fighting back, even when the odds don't seem to be in our favor at times. We struggle because struggle is the right thing to do, and we keep on speaking out and fighting on behalf of these victims of medical malpractice.
Yeah.
And Jennifer, I know you're still in the middle of marketing this one.
Yes.
Do you already have ideas for another documentary?
Oh, you know,
You're like, I want a holiday.
You won't understand the analogy, but you never ask a woman in labor when she's going to have her next child. Because she'll say never. I can't tell you how many times, Menno, I've said, this is my last film.
I mean, I do know what it's like when I've just put a video together. Obviously, the ones I do maybe take 2 weeks, but even then it feels like, oh, that was a big effort. And then it's done, and then it's only just gone live, and people are like, what are you doing next? What are you doing next? I'm like, can you just enjoy this one first, please?
We've got to stay in the moment, haven't we? We've got to enjoy the moment and just let it gradually merge into the next one. See what else comes.
And then
and we're grateful. This is our first media appearance about the film.
With your good self. Yes,
yeah, the very first. This is our premiere interview.
This is the premiere.
Well,
you've got the big interview. You've had it, Menno. It went to you, and deservedly so.
And I'm very, once again, I'm so happy that you made the documentary. And that you put these stories out there. And I think especially because these guys, they all look so different, particularly Toran, you know, with his baseball cap, and he's kind of like that. I'm like, what? Someone like him? Huh? I really hope that it opens people's minds to just how tricky it can be to navigate the world, a man's world, as a man. You know, there's a lot of talk about male privilege, and just because you're a man, you know, life is supposed to be easy or something. I've not found that.
It's not if you're a gay man, or if you're a disabled man, or if you're a working class man struggling to make ends meet over hundreds of years. So we need to look very carefully at these kinds of narratives, and we need to remember that there are male victims of transgender ideology as well, who are suffering terribly and who also need our support and solidarity. Okie dokie.
Well, thank you once again. And to everybody watching, Lost Boys Searching for Manhood is now live, available on YouTube to watch completely for free, just to get these stories out. So please do watch it and share it with friends, with family, share it on social media, just really get the word out, because these stories need to be heard, because the more people see it, the more guys we can save from getting sucked into this. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me in running this channel and making my videos, please consider subscribing to my Patreon or sending me some love via PayPal. And thank you so much to those of you who already support me that way. It makes a huge difference. Massive big thank you to my big spenders: 𝗿𝗲𝗽𝗀𝗀𝗲, me Julie, the lovely Mary, Julia, Mama Turv and the Turventines, Dusty, Doodles, Lethy, Dorothy, Wildfire, Esther, and Martha. Thank you so much.